necessary, but I think most people want to go. They've got trains booked and things. Order. Sir Elaine Saxby to move the motion.
I beg to move that this House has considered fiscal support for hospitality and tourism in coastal areas, and it is a pleasure to serve under your chairmanship, Mrs Cummings. Today, I wish to highlight the vital role of hospitality in our coastal communities, such as my North Devon constituency, and the support the sector needs and deserves. I would like to thank UK Hospitality for their ongoing work and support in this area. I had the opportunity to bring Kate Nichols, the CEO of UK Hospitality, to North Devon last year to meet some of our fabulous hospitality businesses and hear their frustrations as well as their plans for the future. We visited businesses such as the Saunton Sands Hotel, the Carlton Hotel in Ilfracombe, the Georgian Dragon and SQ Bar and Restaurant in Braunton. Some of the challenges facing the sector are not always obvious, particularly in remote coastal locations. And hospitality venues extend so far beyond just pubs, hotels and restaurants, including holiday parks, music venues, bowling, children's play centres, bars and clubs, which contribute so much to all of our enjoyment of coastal areas and resorts, as well as the economy. I have been lobbying ministers for quite some time to continue to find solutions to ensure this vital part of North Devon's and so many other coastal economies continues to thrive. I would like to thank the Minister, who I know is a champion in this sector, for his ongoing patience and engagement in listening to my concerns and also my constituents, as the Minister visited Ilfracombe back in 2021 in his previous role as Minister for Tourism. We met with several business owners and discussed business rates, VAT thresholds and Ilfracombe's ambitions in hospitality. I am sure he recalls the unanimous voice of Ilfracombe's tourism sector to raise the £85,000 VAT threshold, which currently sees much of Ilfracombe, like so many coastal communities, close its doors when the businesses reach the threshold. When first elected, I naively thought it was just the seasonality, but as staycations came back into the vogue post-pandemic, we saw some businesses close mid-August as the threshold was reached. Indeed, a local accountant told me just last weekend that he advises all his hospitality businesses to remain below the threshold. At a time when we are looking for our economy to grow, why do we have a threshold that creates a cliff edge that does the exact opposite for the hospitality sector? In North Devon alone, we are home to nearly 2,500 hospitality venues, employing over 8,000 people and contributing over 400 million to our local economy. The hospitality sector's success is vital for economic prosperity and plays a crucial role in shaping the very essence of our community. Yet, despite the resilience inherent in the sector, recent years have presented unprecedented challenges, particularly in our coastal towns. The impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, coupled with the energy crisis and a labour market grappling with record vacancy levels, have stifled growth and pose significant threats to the sustainability of our hospitality businesses. But I also want to draw on the positives that have happened with all the challenges presented. The government has supported the sector substantially during the pandemic, not least in the furlough scheme, which continued even if hospitality venues were shut.
Would my honourable friend give way?
Of course I would give way.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and securing today's debate. She's making a barnstorming speech about Devon, which may even make me traipse slightly further north into Devon to her constituency to help out her industry. The hospitality and tourism industry in Devon, as we know, supports thousands of jobs. As chair of the all-party parliamentary group for hospitality and tourism, I want the government to build on its record that she's been describing of support for the industry in Devon and the UK. The Trade Association, UK Hospitality, she's already mentioned the CEO, Kate Nichols, has three asks of the Chancellor for this budget. First, implementing a 3% cap on the increase to the large property business rates multiplier. Second, introducing a cut to the lower rate of employers' NICs to 10%. And third, permanently, this is a big one, reducing the VAT rate on hospitality business to 12.5%. Does my honourable friend agree these measures would really help and provide a big boost for jobs and investment in her part of Devon and my part of Devon?
And I thank my honourable friend and neighbour for his contribution. It's as if we both speak to the same group when we're I agree entirely with his contribution, as I so often do. And I am very keen that Devon hospitality businesses right the way across and down the peninsula are able to benefit, and that the Minister will hear our asks this afternoon. But we cannot underestimate the pandemic's impact on businesses. The hospitality sector came out of COVID-19 heavily indebted. I hope the financial sector can look to what more can be done to support hospitality to repay their debts, which currently stand at £8 billion in bank debt and £2 billion of landlord debt. The pandemic harmed hospitality businesses and made their recovery much more difficult. Whilst I warmly welcome the small business rate relief introduced in the autumn statement, which provided some support, up to two-thirds of hospitality businesses find themselves excluded. Not due to generating immense profits, but rather because they operate in larger premises in high footfall areas. Consequently, the impending 6.7% in business rates, along with skyrocketing wage costs, presents a daunting prospect for the survival of many businesses. I applaud the government's commitment to creating a higher wage economy. It is crucial to acknowledge the unique challenges faced by hospitality businesses, especially those based in coastal areas like my North Devon constituency, which are often small in scale, seasonal and working to tight margins. These businesses anticipate a 17% increase in staffing costs from April, with 98% expressing concern how to manage the impact of the upcoming national living wage hike. Many of the businesses that should have benefited the most from the small business rate relief are actually facing wage rises in the hospitality sector that far exceed the business rate relief itself. We are already seeing hospitality businesses contracting their hours, reducing the number of staff they employ or the hours which they work. Far too many of our pubs are now open weekends only or cannot find chefs, and so having to have some nights without food service, reducing their profitability even further. The national living wage hike, whilst warmly welcomed by the hard-working teams that work across our hospitality businesses, is a headache for business owners, who frequently are earning significantly less than the national living wage themselves due to the extensive hours they work and relying on their ever-declining profitability to pay their wage. Far too many of our hospitality businesses are facing a crunch this April. Too many of the sums we do up here rely on a 35-hour working week. Hospitality is a 24/7 business. And in remote coastal areas with low unemployment, such as North Devon, many staff are much younger as well. And this increase in the national living wage is going to hit these businesses particularly hard. One of the key asks today is to cut the lower rate of employer national insurance contributions to 10% and consider increasing the threshold to share the burden of this policy between business and government. But the biggest ask from my hospitality businesses across North Devon, and I had the pleasure of chatting with many landlords in some of the fabulous pubs back home during recess, was that their VAT burden is too high. VAT in the hospitality sector is significantly higher than elsewhere in Europe, placing us at a competitive disadvantage. During COVID, we saw huge success from the reduction in VAT for this sector. And during that time, 70% of businesses benefiting passed on the VAT cut to consumers to keep prices low. A hugely successful local pub shared their figures with me. With a turnover of just over £1 million, they are paying 25% in tax just in VAT and employment taxes. That's £250,000 to the Exchequer before they've even considered paying their bills, wages, supplies. Last year, we lost 3,000 hospitality venues in the UK, and I am concerned that if the government doesn't take further action to share the burden of this cost, we may lose even more this year. Unfortunately, I have one recent case in my North Devon constituency, Broomhill Estate, which is unfortunately closing due to its VAT costs. I want to thank Alex Kleiner for all his work and for letting me know how much of an impact a reduction in VAT from 20% to 15% would have made to his business. Hearing directly from a business owner, he said that there would have been three benefits: a reduction in absolute VAT, an impact on cash flow, and whilst harder to quantify, an uplift in footfall from more attractive pricing. He said, and I quote, 4 out of the past 7 quarters, a 5% VAT reduction would have completely offset my electricity bill. Unfortunately, in this instance, any changes to VAT will come too late for such an important landmark in North Devon. And whilst I know it is a big ask, I do hope the Treasury may again consider a reduction in the VAT rate for the hospitality and tourism sector to 12.5%, as this would help them to overcome the above-inflation increases in tax and national living wage, avoid further inflationary price spikes, and unlock investment. This measure aligns with international standards, stimulating tourism and offering domestic tourists a more affordable alternative to travelling abroad. I am confident that not every publican and hotelier is wrong in telling me this is the one measure that would help them the most. A cut, even a temporary one, would be a boost. For so many coastal communities, their tourism industry has changed since the hotels were built in the Victorian era, and many have large properties, which may not benefit from all year-round occupation, particularly in those communities where swathes of the tourist attractions, shops and restaurants have closed for the winter because of the VAT threshold issue. Hospitality businesses rely on space to host people and therefore have larger premises in high footfall areas. Businesses will often hit the upper rateable value band at a far lower turnover or profitability than other businesses. The hospitality sector pays 2.5% of turnover on business rates, which is 10 times that of banks and insurers. I hope the Treasury is looking at the introduction of a cap on the increase in the large property business rates multiplier at 3% in England, aligning with the expected inflation rate in April. And additionally, I hope the devolved administrations in Scotland and Wales to pass on the benefits of this relief in full.
I thank my friend for, first of all, securing the debate, but actually for her very compelling fiscal case that she's putting forward for the reforms that, quite frankly, are essential. I think we've been in this chamber previously in recent weeks talking about the same thing. In addition to fiscal measures, does she agree that we need supply-side reforms for coastal communities? Because many of our constituents in coastal communities do feel isolated. She's spoken about labour market shortages. We need to make sure that we've got public services, NHS doctors, education, employment, banking facilities in these communities to serve the purpose to actually make them healthy and thriving, and therefore increase the footfall for the hospitality trade, but also the employment market for hospitality too.
Hear, hear.
I thank my right honourable friend for her intervention, and I could not agree with her more. And that there is many, many asks that we could put for our coastal communities, but I have spared the Minister the rest of mine this afternoon. But I agree entirely with the points that were made. Because whilst I am here, I thought it might be remiss not to mention alcohol duty. The freeze on alcohol duty at the autumn statement was welcome, but this does not directly help our much-loved pubs. Pubs have reported significant price increases from brewers and other producers despite the freeze. A reduction in VAT would leave the choice to pass on and/or reinvest in the hands of the retailer, not with the multinational brewery in the case of alcohol. I have continuously campaigned to support the campaign for real ale, as it would play such a crucial role in stopping our many vibrant pubs and hospitality businesses from going under. Whatever the scheme, a reduction bringing us in line with the clear majority of our European neighbours, even permanently or temporary, would be a lifeline for our hospitality venues. And whilst talking about great pubs, I would like to take the opportunity to highlight the Belle Inn pub in Chittlehampton, as well as the Chittlehampton Village Shop, who serve excellent tea and cake, who are both finalists in the Countryside Alliance Awards, and voting is now open for anyone that would like to help them along. The potential of the hospitality sector to contribute to economic growth cannot be overstated. UK Hospitality's economic evidence submitted to the Treasury outlines the conditions required for growth, estimating the creation of 500,000 new jobs by 2029 and an annual growth rate of up to 6%. I hope the Treasury will carefully examine the evidence and arguments presented, recognising the immense potential that the hospitality and tourism sector holds for the UK. By supporting this sector, we not only ensure the prosperity of businesses, but also contribute to increased tax revenues that fund essential public services. I am hugely reassured to see this particular Treasury Minister here today, who has been up to see us and understands so much more about our tourism and hospitality sector, particularly in remote coastal locations, such as my beautiful North Devon constituency, and I hope this may influence some of those critical budget decisions.
The question is that this House has considered fiscal support for tourism and hospitality in coastal areas. I call Jim Shannon.
Chair, and it is indeed a pleasure to serve under your chairship. And can I, first of all, thank the Honourable Member for North Devon for leading today's debate. The Honourable Lady always is very enthusiastic and very zealous for constituency, and I always like to hear what other honourable and right honourable members say about their constituency, because I find that what they say really is mirrored by what I have to say for my constituency. I'm going to take a wee step down Strangford way and try to tell some of the good things that we have back home, but also to support the Honourable Lady and what she puts forward, because quite clearly this issue is so important. The Honourable Lady quite clearly understands, represents the coastal constituency, which she is so passionate about. And it's fantastic to be here and support her and those similarities that the Honourable Lady has referred to, and all of our constituencies. The Honourable Lady mentioned recently in our debate the impact that recent storms and weather have had on businesses as well. And I was here for that one as well within our constituency, and that is certainly something that needs to be addressed. So we're here to discuss many things. We look to the Minister, as we always do. The Minister is always very receptive to our comments and has that ability to respond in a way that we all feel encouraged. We will feel better encouraged, Minister, of course, if there's some help financially or some ideas at the end of it. I'm sure the Minister will have those ideas, and I've no doubt about that. And it's also very, very pleased to see the Shadow Minister for the SNP and also for the Labour Party in their places, both also committed to making lives better and to ensuring that help for tourism and hospitality in coastal areas it becomes a reality. Why do I enjoy these debates? I enjoy these debates because right away here's a subject matter that I can relate to right away, and the Honourable Lady has done it very, very well for her constituency. These debates give us an opportunity to understand other areas, but also to really show off the beauty of my constituency of Strangford. What is known as the Ards Peninsula consists of numerous villages such as Ballywater, Portavogie, Portaferry, which have stunning scenery. We live in the edge of Strangford Loch, and it's an area of outstanding natural beauty, and also Ramscar designated area as well. So it's really, really important, and I live in the edge of that, and I must say I'm very privileged to do so. Not only this, there are many tourism attractions and hospitality businesses that are pivotal to the local economy and play a huge role for local visitors. And as the Honourable Lady does, I will try and do the same. They are often family-run, and therefore when I speak about these individual businesses, I speak about knowledge of having known them for many, many years. And there's such a variety of what is offered. And this is what makes my constituency of Strangford so special, because of all those businesses that come together in the tourism and hospitality sector along in coastal areas. We've had numerous tourist attractions such as the National Trust grounds at Mount Stewart and out between Cardor and Grey Abbey and Newton Ards, and it's really is the jewel of the crown for Strangford. It has well in excess of six-figure sums of people coming to visit all times of the year. In COVID, those numbers never drop very much. There's fabulous walks and host events such as the jazz nights that they have them during the summer. And not to mention, this is a much-used location for weddings as well. In addition, as part of the farm diversification scheme, land in Ballywater was transformed into a mini-golf course. Just to give an example again of what we're doing, the guy that I sat beside in primary school, that wasn't yesterday, Madam Chair, Jim Davison, he's in the farm diversification, and that's one of the things that he's come up with, the mini-golf course. It's much loved by families and couples from all over, and has become a much-visited event and fun day for families whenever they're about. The sheer volume of hospitality that is offered is just incredible. And I do, you can probably guess, I'm very enthusiastic, I'm very proud to tell others about it. I've told some ministers here, and I know the minister in place will be no doubt booking his trip to Strangford probably before this day's out, as one of the former as one of the former ministers who sat there did as well, and she enjoyed her time across the water and came to visit in my constituency as well. Plasty Farm ice cream. As an example, again, farm diversification and something that one of the dairy farmers in that area realised there was a potential for his ice cream, and he's been developing out over the years. Will Taylor's done exceptionally well. Acklandville Gin Distillery, another example of one of many gin and whisky distilleries we have across the constituency. Harsons of Grey Abbey, they're family friends, they're my next door neighbours. Again, an example of how they've built that up for a restaurant, for a cafe, for the garden centre, and it came out of nowhere, Madam Chair, and built it up. But now we have the issue of hospitality costs, which do are part of the problem for them. They have a lovely venue. They have a lovely a visual venue as well, because it looks right over Strangford Lough, and that's quite an attraction. One of my local DUP councillors for the area, David Kerr, has a fruit and veg shop that he started himself from his farm in Kirkcudbright. Fantastic B&Bs in the village of Ballywalter and a hotel in Portaferry, providing warm and homely accommodation for tourists. The wedding venue, the Orange Tree, again another. It just sits right here, and that window there, the other side, is where you see Strangford Lough. So it's a coastal venue in every sense of the word. It's become a very much sought-after wedding venue. And I was at a wedding there just last year where my niece was married as well. So all of these businesses that I've mentioned, as the Honourable Lady has done so, create jobs. They create wage packets in people's pockets. They create opportunities for young people as well who want to have a part-time job, or they want to start off somewhere. And it really is vital that the issue for tourism and hospitality in coastal areas is addressed, so that those jobs can be retained and the opportunities can be there. The list, truly, Madam Chair, is endless in terms of what there is to offer. Like the member for North Devon, there are exceptional circumstances, such as weather conditions, that ultimately play a massive role in the footfall of coastal areas, especially after COVID. We have witnessed many shutting down as they cannot sustain the lack of business. It's just impossible to carry on. Furthermore, the rise in the cost of living has had a significant impact on businesses being able to pay their bills. And I know from the retail trade and from those involved in the hospitality, Colin Neal is one of those guys who represents them, and he's always very, very vocal, and he's always very, very factual and evidentially based when it comes to telling what happens. He tells us the pressures that they're under. There are some smaller and medium businesses that were being charged thousands of pounds for electricity and severely struggling to pay their gas and oil bills. This ultimately is not sustainable, and it wasn't for them, and they unfortunately had to close or sell on to new management. So there is a pressure. I want to replicate what the Honourable Lady has said, and others will do likewise shortly. And I think what you'll find, Madam Deputy Speaker, that while we represent different parts of this great United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, we're all saying probably the same issue. So when we look to the Minister for a response, it's based upon our facts on the ground and what people are telling us. So there is certainly a call for government to better support these local businesses, especially in the coastal constituencies that we all represent. Government incentives for more local business to want to choose to open in these areas are crucial to sustain the livelihoods of these areas. Well, over the last few years, last 2 years in particular, I've seen quite a few of the smaller hospitality sectors and shops and venues in my area closing. It's important that we keep what we have and that those opportunities are in place. So I believe the government must do more to support these local businesses, especially in terms of the Barnett consequential, is my request to the Minister, and also the block grant. I know that in the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee on Wednesday past there, we had the Secretary of State there. And I think that, to be fair, Madam Chair, I think the Secretary of State very clearly understands that the Barnett consequential for Northern Ireland has not been okay for the last few years, and because of that, government are committed to the change in the Barnett consequential, and it's going to be something along like the Welsh model, where we think we should be, because that be one that would reflect better our population growth, which is jumped up to 1.95 million now, where it was approximately 1.75 just about 10 years ago. And also, I think the particular peculiarities of costs for Northern Ireland as well. So I'm very encouraged by the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and by government's dedication to making those changes. And my question to the Secretary of State on Wednesday past at the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee, I did ask him, the Secretary of State, while he had outlined a timescale, he did say in my question to him, in answer to it, that the government were looking very much at how they could make it quicker. And if that's the case, then that will bring substantial monies in and give a quality to the Barnett consequential. I finished with this sentence. I would greatly appreciate it if the Minister would consider looking at this and discussions with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, because I think there is a commitment, an agreement that can be raised to see if there's any more that can be done to support local businesses in coastal areas. And my constituency, they do need help. I think I'm very pleased to have the Northern Ireland Assembly back, Madam Chair. I think most people are, because ultimately it gives accountability in the process. But for us to do well and to deliver for our constituents, we as a very much integral part of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Northern Ireland, need to have that barring consequential change. And that will enable us to support our businesses across the whole of Northern Ireland. Madam Chair, thank you.
Sally Ann Hart.
It's a pleasure to speak under your chairship, Mrs Cummings, and I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for North Devon, on securing today's debate on supporting the tourism and hospitality sector in our coastal communities. It's important to acknowledge the government's work following COVID-19 to support and rebuild our tourism and hospitality sector with reductions in VAT and business rates, the job retention scheme, business grants, and support coastal communities with the recent news that holiday lets will be controlled this summer through a registration scheme and a planning permission requirement. And I'm delighted that the government has taken this step, as this is something that I've raised directly with ministers, with think tanks, and through the APPG for coastal communities. But despite all the support, coastal communities have significant underfunding challenges. And my beautiful constituent of Hastings and Rye is a tourist hub in 1066 country. And based on the most recent figures for 1066 country, supports over 12,600 jobs locally and an estimated turnover of 550 million per year as a result of tourism. However, like many other coastal communities, there remains a lack of specific and targeted fiscal support. Tourism has long been overlooked as an industry, and I'm very delighted that the Minister here was the former tourism minister at some point, so he does have a great understanding of this industry. It's often described as a Cinderella industry, but it's vital to the UK's economic growth. UK-wide, tourism is recognised as an important part of rural and coastal economies and has huge potential for growth, particularly in the more deprived rural areas and coastal towns and villages where there is untapped potential to generate tourism-related economic growth and employment. Essential infrastructure such as roads, public spaces and facilities catering to tourists often suffer from neglect due to insufficient financial support, and it's imperative that the government prioritise strategic investment. It's great to see levelling up funding going into many coastal areas, with Hastings and Rother receiving in total 80 million over the next few years. The tourism sector cannot thrive in this country without sufficient fiscal support. By investing in the upkeep and promotion of coastal areas, often providing the seed funding to leverage in private sector investment, the government can ensure the long-term sustainability of both the tourism sector and the unique identity of these areas. Many businesses have felt the effect of the national minimum wage increases. Mitigating this could be made through temporary cuts to the lower rate of employment national insurance contributions to 10% and or an increase to the lower threshold. Additionally, permanently reducing the rate of VAT to 12.5%, as my honourable friend for North Devon has already said, for hospitality businesses would help them recover and thrive without having to reduce employment or increase prices. The Pragmatics report, Communities on the Edge, into which the APPG for Coastal Communities, which I chair, had a significant input, made a number of recommendations to support the visitor economy, such as improving seasonal workers' visa schemes for temporary hospitality workers and supporting the initiation of business mentorships for small coastal enterprises to share best practice and help with the digital transition. And I would encourage relevant ministers to have a look at this report. The hospitality and service industries sustained by the tourism sector are particularly crucial for the livelihoods of coastal residents. And I would like to thank all the hospitality and service workers and businesses in Hastings and Rye for their dedication and amazing hard work. Supporting tourism in coastal communities is not just an investment in the local economy. It's an investment in our residents. And we have amazing hospitality business. I can't actually go through them all because they're all so incredible. From cafes, restaurants, pubs, so many things. So come and see for yourselves, because Hastings and Rye is a fantastic place to visit. But due to the seasonality of tourism in the UK, it's vital that the hospitality and tourism sector is properly supported by replacing the Coastal Communities Fund for projects that specifically tackled this issue. And I would like to make that point. We do need specific policy, funding and strategic plan for our coastal communities. To combat the impacts of seasonality, there needs to be an increased fiscal support to coastal communities, especially in the summer months, to manage waste issues, over-congestion of areas and the need for larger police presence due to antisocial behaviour in tourist hotspots, such as Camber Sands, on hot summer days that might get 25,000 visitors all coming at once. So this does require a fairer funding formula for local authorities, for police and other public sector provisions. It's essential that we do not leave any of our coastal communities behind due to poor fiscal investment, so we have to prioritise our coastal communities. Thank you.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Mayor. This comes as a pleasure to serve with you in the chair, and again I congratulate the Honourable Lady, the member for North Devon, for securing this debate, which, whether by accident or design, I think has produced a very interesting range of communities about which to speak, from which there are a number of common threads. I should first of all remind the House of my entry in the Register of Members' Interests, and that I am a partner in the farm that runs my family, the firm that runs my family farm, which also includes holiday let accommodation. In many ways that is a living example of many of the changes that and the opportunities, in fact, that the visitor economy brings to communities such as mine in Orkney and Shetland, and doubtless in other coastal and island communities around the country. It is of enormous importance to communities such as ours. I was listening with interest, as always, to the Honourable Member from Strangford, and what he described effectively is the ripple effect that you get from dropping the stone in the water. And the stone in this case is the visitor economy. And yes, it comes very obviously to those who operate the hotels, the bed and breakfasts, the self-catering accommodation. Then it goes out to those who are able to work part-time, self-employed in tour guiding, for example. And then there are those who have the jobs in the servicing of that accommodation, and then it can go out and out and out. It may then just be a useful add-on to another conventional business. You see, and the Honourable Member referred to it, the number of businesses in farming in rural and coastal communities that now have some sort of tourist add-on, perhaps seasonal, but at the end of the day, it's what you can show at the end of the year to your accountant that matters. So these ways in which the communities within our more rural and coastal island communities are able to get up and do things for themselves, I think is quite an inspiring story. And indeed, the real beauty of it for them all is that by and large, these are self-employed or small businesses, medium enterprises based. And the money that is earned and paid out by these companies stays in the communities. So it goes into the local shops, it goes into post offices, it allows families to live there. So there are children who go into local schools, we can keep local doctors and services, banks, the whole story continues. There's no single silver bullet for these economies, but this is a very important part that makes the whole thing then somehow more feasible. There are a number of significant challenges, which I'll touch on. They're not, strictly speaking, fiscal, but they are significant in the way in which they hold back island communities nevertheless. In Scotland, we have an ageing ferry fleet, and for island communities that has been problematic for the last few years, and it's only, sadly, getting worse. The availability of labour in the local community is something which causes real difficulty, especially in a seasonal economy where you've got people moving into work in an island community who are at the same time needing accommodation, which is when people are coming to stay in the same accommodation. So the housing available in our island and coastal communities is a significant area in which government-led provision, public sector provision, could make a real difference to the ability of businesses to grow. The regulatory burden, unfortunately, seems to get greater every year. In Scotland, we now have the short-term licensing scheme, and it will be interesting to contrast how that works with the way in which it's now being done south of the border through a planning mechanism. My sense is, we've not yet seen figures for it, but my sense is that especially in the smaller outer isles in Orkney and in Shetland, we may see a lot of people just walking away from the provision of bed and breakfast or self-catering accommodation as a consequence of the licensing regime. It is very expensive to comply with, especially if you're away from the centres of population. So goodness knows it's difficult enough to get work done if you're operating a business in Kirkwall and Lerwick. But if you are operating your business in one of the outer isles, in Sandy, in Stronsay, North Ronaldsay, or in Shetland, perhaps in Unstyell or Feckler, then that becomes an extra burden and an extra cost yet again. The further away you get from the centre, inevitably the fewer weeks in the year you will be letting your accommodation because you're getting fewer people coming to stay in your community. And again, at the end of the day, is it worth it? And the balance now, sadly, tips off in the opposite direction to say no. So that's some of the challenges. But at the end of the day, these are people who are self-starting and entrepreneurial, and they do a lot to bring economic growth to their own community. And there are certain levers that the Treasury can look at in particular to help them grow. The difference between the fiscal levers that we can pull and the other sort of, shall we call it, grant-aided incentives and opportunities are that fiscal levers allow people more opportunity to decide what is best for them and their business instead of having to design their business to conform with the various requirements of a grant application or a discount scheme that there may be somewhere. So there is a real opportunity for the government to add value and to add opportunity to tourism, visitor economy businesses in our island and coastal communities. The single most important one that I hear from them time and again is the one that was touched on by the Honourable Lady, the member for Devon North, and that is the reduction in value-added tax. It's very rare in any sector that you hear such a consistency in message. But we've seen a small example of this already with the reduction to 5%, I think it was, during the COVID pandemic. It would be interesting to know what analysis the Treasury has done of the tax take in that time, albeit that everybody was operating in a much reduced market. But I come back to my own experience from my time in government when we reduced the level of spirits duty. We did that for only the second time in history, I think. We did that in the expectation of a significant cut in revenue. In fact, it produced a significant increase in revenue to the Treasury. The tax take I can't remember the exact figures. I think we expected a 600 million decrease, and we actually got an 800 million increase. So that kind of shows what is possible sometimes when you reduce the burden on industry and business and allow them the opportunity to use that extra cash to grow their own business. I strongly suspect, and indeed there has been a significant research done in this in the past by some of the big consultancies. I think Ernst & Young is the one that springs most readily to my mind, that shows, in fact, that the same would be possible for our for the visitor economy in our island and coastal communities. That being the case at a time when we are wanting to grow economy, when we are relying on that and spreading the benefits of growth right out across the whole country, not just hoarding it here in the City of London, surely that is something that has to commend itself to the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Cummings. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. I congratulate my honourable friend, the member for North Devon, for securing this debate, and I thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting it. Tourism around the British coast remains a vitally important component part of the UK economy. It is perhaps at times overlooked, and it is right that we are having this debate in advance of the spring budget statement at the beginning of March, and at the end of March we do have the start of the season with the Easter weekend. Ms Cummings, I shall start, like most other colleagues have, by providing an advertorial for the tourism and hospitality industry in the Lowestoft and Waveney area. Now, some might find this, as we said, a bit of a joke or tedious, but actually it does serve a very important purpose. For what we're doing is showcasing the enormous range of leisure and tourism opportunities available on the coast of all four nations, as well as the beauty and diversity of that coastline. There is, Ms Cummings, something for everyone to savour, as well as many job opportunities. Going back to Lowestoft and Waveney, in Lowestoft, to the north at Corton, and to the south at Pakefield and Kessingland, there are a wide variety of beaches, including the gloriously sandy South Beach in Lowestoft. We have two piers, the Claremont Pier, which the Llewellyn family are restoring to its former glory, and the South Pier, which is let at a peppercorn by Associated British Ports to a community interest company which I chair. To the north and south of Lowestoft, we have two of the biggest visitor attractions in East Anglia, the Pleasurewood Hills Theme Park and Africa Alive, which is run by the Zoological Society of East Anglia. All along this coast, there are a variety of holiday parks run by both family businesses and larger national companies. We are also the gateway at Alton Broad and at Beccles to the often overlooked by our noisy neighbours in Norfolk, the Suffolk Broads, which are surrounded by a stunning landscape which the Suffolk Wildlife Trust are playing an increasingly important role in restoring at Carlton Marshes, at Alton Marshes, and as announced last week, at Whirlingham Marshes. Finally, Ho Seasons, who take the strain for many of us out of organising and arranging our holidays, have been based in Alton Broad and Lowestoft for nearly 80 years. Ms Cummings, hopefully I have painted the picture highlighting the importance of coastal tourism in the Waveney area. COVID hit local businesses hard, though the support that the government provided was a lifeline for many. The pandemic, as we are hearing, unfortunately does have a long and bitter tail. And for many, the 2023 summer season was worse than that for 2022. And looking forward to the forthcoming season, many businesses, their confidence is low. High energy costs are continuing to have an impact. The response to these challenges by many businesses and operators is to cut back on their opening hours, delay investment, and reduce staff. One business has highlighted to me, as we've heard from all around the chamber today, the negative impact of a national minimum wage. They do not begrudge paying this increase to their staff, but it does present challenges that cascade right through their business and ultimately lead to higher charges to their customers. Those customers at a time, their own wallets, if you like, are under enormous strain. A holiday park operator has brought to my attention the delays in obtaining planning permission for an upgrade and an extension of their facilities, not in the Waveney area, but elsewhere on the East Anglian coast. An application that should have taken 8 weeks took 1.5 years. Ms Cummings, leisure businesses in coastal areas, such as in Suffolk, are not asking for handouts, but what they are rightly seeking is a level playing field. To achieve this, I would be grateful if my honourable friend the Minister could consider the following fiscal measures. And I sense I'm largely repeating what others have done, but in this place, repetition is actually a very, very important, has played a very, very important role. Firstly, as UK hospitality are seeking to cap the increase to business rates for larger premises at 3%. Ultimately, we must have annual revaluations and we must drive the rate in the pound back down to the 30 to 35p in the pound level, which was what we had when business rates were introduced in the early 90s. That said, in the short term, hospitality and leisure businesses, which are what I would describe many of them as property hungry, but relatively low income generating, they should not have to pay onerously high business rates. Secondly, so as to address the challenge which I've mentioned of funding the increase in the national minimum wage, at the forthcoming budget, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, should introduce a cut in the lower rate of employer national insurance contributions to 10% and to increase the thresholds. Thereby, he will be sharing the benefit of this, in many ways, very welcome policy, but not only with businesses, but with the government as well. I sense that is only equitable. Thirdly, so as to ensure that planning applications of the type I've mentioned are dealt with promptly and are not a brake on investment, we do need that fair funding review of the local government funding settlement carried out as quickly as possible, as that funding settlement is skewed against county and coastal councils. I'll move on, and I would also ask if my honourable friend could act as a messenger. Not Cupid, perhaps, but as a messenger to other departments with other things that coastal businesses in coastal communities need to be able to not only survive, but ultimately thrive as well. First of all, to DEFRA. Along the Suffolk and Norfolk coast, we need urgent investment in coastal defences. Our glorious beaches are increasingly unsafe, and holiday park operators and other businesses will not invest in facilities if they are either at an increased risk of disappearing over the cliff or being washed away. Again, to DEFRA, there should be national investment in the coordination and promotion of the King Charles III England Coast Path National Trail. To the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. Visit Britain and Visit England should provide parity of support for coastal and rural economies with that given to London and other core cities. Fourthly, to the Department of Levelling Up, Homes and Communities, we do need, as we've heard, to revive the Coastal Communities Fund and separate the funding provided by the Crown Estate from the granting of licences for offshore wind farms. Ms. Cummins, this money derives from our coastal waters. It should be used to address the many challenges that are being faced by coastal communities and not thinly dispersed across the whole country. Finally, and back to DEFRA, whilst progress is being made in improving the quality of bathing water around the coast, further pressure must be applied to the water companies to completely eliminate storm overflows as quickly as possible. Ms. Cummins, in conclusion, coastal Britain is utterly unique. We must cherish it, and we must make sure that the tourism and hospitality businesses operating there have every opportunity, first to survive, but then to flourish, and then to bring significant benefits to the people who live all around our coast. Thank you.
Stephen Bonner.
Thank you very much, Ms Cummins. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair this afternoon, and also thank my honourable friend for North Devon for securing this important debate for us today. It's always a pleasure to come to this hall and give a perspective on behalf of the Scottish National Party. The hospitality sector across coastal and rural communities has weathered recent relentless storms of financial hardship over the past few years. The UK Government must now surely extend a helping hand via Barnett to businesses across the hospitality sector, because it's so important to the long-term success of our rural communities and remote areas, and also to halt the continued closure of hospitality venues that we have all become accustomed to throughout our constituencies. From the economic fallout of Brexit to the devastating impact of the pandemic, compounded, of course, by energy price shocks and inflationary spikes, our pubs, restaurants and cafes have been fighting an uphill battle for their very survival. The multifaceted challenges that they are confronting have been unprecedented. As a result, Chair, between March 2020 and the end of the year 2022, a staggering 10% of UK hospitality businesses closed their doors permanently. In Scotland alone, over 500 pubs and breweries closed in 2023, and the struggle persists for many, many more. Many are citing, of course, the rise in energy costs. 9 out of 10 hospitality businesses now face far higher energy and supplier costs. And of course, the negative impacts of Brexit on rural and coastal communities is never hard to find these days. The compounding effects of border controls on fresh food and flowers to and from the European Union further exacerbates the situation, burdening Scottish hospitality with over £500 million in increased costs and delays annually. Inflation is undoubtedly a key factor in that, but it's impacting on consumers' choices, and with the increased energy cost, the picture is bleak for many yet in the industry. Now, as representatives across the whole of many diverse and different communities in this hall, we all recognise the part played in the local areas by these venues. Pubs and cafes are essential social hubs, fostering community cohesion and combating loneliness. They are places that connect our communities, bring people together to share life's highs and lows. The Scottish hospitality sector serves as a massive employer, also accounting for 8% of all workforce jobs, employing over 228,000 individuals. It contributes £140 billion to the economy and £54 billion in tax receipts. Another issue of great concern, particularly to those of us in Scotland, is depopulation within our rural and coastal communities. Experts tell us that it threatens their very existence, and we know that the UK Government's legal migration policy now does nothing to draw people into our coastal or rural communities, because the median wage in a place like the Western Isles in Scotland is £24,000, but anybody looking to come into the UK will have to earn a lot more than that, and that is basically making huge parts of Scotland will have no inward migration. This is a real concern for us. The Scottish Rural Visa Pilot Scheme, championed by the Scottish Government, aimed to address this by attracting workers to key sectors like hospitality, because Brexit-induced labour shortages persist, with 72% of hospitality businesses struggling to fill their vacancies. And we know, again, across Scotland, the vast majority of people in the hospitality sector did come from our friends in the European Union. The UK Government's reluctance to heed the calls for special visa arrangements exacerbates this issue, and it is imperiling the Scottish economy even further. We on the SNP benches have consistently advocated for fiscal measures to be enacted to alleviate the strain on the sector. And as we have heard across the House today, across this hall, VAT reductions, particularly for hospitality and tourism, could provide much needed relief. So I hope the Minister has heard that from all sides today. Additionally, slashing beer duties could stimulate job creation, benefiting both businesses and indeed individuals. The Scottish Government have implemented measures such as the 100% relief for island hospitality businesses, but broader support is very much still necessary. The Small Business Bonus Scheme and generous rates relief exemplify the commitment to support businesses and communities across Scotland. And of course, the Conservative proposed tax cuts for the wealthy diverges wildly from the public's preference of prioritising public services, as is evidenced in a recent YouGov poll. We must ensure that the upcoming spring budget allocates resources where they are needed most, supporting our vital sector and safeguarding our rural and coastal communities across Scotland. It is, if the Government here in Westminster do not want to stand up and stand with our hospitality industry, ensuring its resilience and its longevity for generations to come, then the very least they can do is give Scotland the full fiscal powers so that we can do the job that they are not. Thank you.
Shadow Minister James Murray.
Thank you very much, and it's a pleasure to speak in this debate with you and the Chair, Ms Cummings. I'd like to begin by congratulating the Honourable Member for North Devon in securing this debate on fiscal support for the tourism and hospitality industries in coastal areas. And like her, I have benefited greatly from my conversations with Kate Nichols at UK Hospitality, and may I put that on the record. But I'm pleased to respond on behalf of the opposition to the points raised during this debate. In this debate, we've heard from members speak passionately about the importance of hospitality and tourism for the jobs that they bring to local economies, for the vitality they bring to our local areas, and for the enjoyment they bring to all of our lives. The tourism and hospitality industries have been hit by a series of challenges, as we've heard from many members, from COVID to the cost of living crisis. In the opposition, we are clear that hospitality and tourism are vital to the UK economy, and they need a government ready and able to help them thrive. In 2019, the economic output of tourism-related industries was estimated at £134 billion, of which £74 billion was estimated to be directly generated by tourism. These figures are equivalent to 6.6% and 3.6% of the whole economy, respectively. Additionally, as I mentioned in a Westminster Hall debate on fiscal support for the hospitality sector a few weeks ago, hospitality provides 3% of the UK's economic output and billions in tax revenues for the Treasury. Now, hospitality and tourism are important industries for communities across the country. As we've heard from the Honourable Member for North Devon and others in this debate, they are especially critical for coastal areas. We know that coastal communities are particularly reliant on tourism and hospitality for employment and income in many cases. And when the economy is not working as it should, those communities are more likely to suffer from deprivation and unemployment. Data from Visit Britain shows that 10% of inbound tourists in 2019 visited England's coasts and beaches. Those most likely to journey to the coast were on visits lasting a week or longer, and this figure is higher in Wales, Scotland and the southwest of England. These trips are vital to people's livelihoods right across the UK. Now, in my West London constituency, we have no coasts that I can praise in this debate. But may I put on record that when I occasionally leave Ealing North, I am very pleased to be able to enjoy visiting coastal areas across the country, including Oban on the west coast of Scotland, Saltburn, Whitby and Stade in North Yorkshire, and indeed visiting my family on the south coast of England from Brighton to Fareham and Littlehampton. However, we know that many hospitality and tourism businesses in coastal communities are finding it harder and harder to succeed, with high inflation, rising rents, and of course the burden of business rates. At the same time, their customers find they have less money to spend enjoying what seaside hotels, pubs, cafes, restaurants and so on have to offer, as people have seen their wages flatline whilst taxes and the cost of living climb relentlessly. Whilst today's debate is rightly an opportunity to recognise the central role of hospitality and tourism in British life, it is also an opportunity to make clear that these industries need a government who will support them to thrive. Madam Chair, Labour will revitalise the hospitality and tourism industries, and we will help coastal communities back on their feet after 14 years under the Conservatives. It is clear that the antiquated system of business rates is doing the industries no favour. As I set out in the debate on fiscal support for the hospitality sector a few weeks ago, the hospitality and tourism businesses in coastal areas may have had hope when they heard the government's promise of a fundamental review of the business rate system in their 2019 manifesto. However, the fundamental review never materialised, and trade groups representing consumer-facing businesses have expressed their dismay at the government's inaction on this promise to businesses. In March last year, the Federation of Small Businesses responded to what the government was doing on business rates by saying, and I quote, "The 2019 manifesto commitment to hold a fundamental downward review of business rates has not happened. These changes do not amount to the fundamental overhaul the system needs to reduce the chilling impact of a regressive tax that you pay before even earning a penny in turnover, let alone profit." Madam Chair, we will not stand by whilst businesses struggle from year to year facing uncertainty. Indeed, as my right honourable friend, the member for Leeds West, the Shadow Chancellor, has set out, if we were in government, Labour would scrap and replace business rates, shifting the burden away from hospitality and retail businesses who continue to shoulder a heavy burden compared with those operating primarily in the digital economy. Our new system would incentivise investment, promote entrepreneurship and reward businesses that move into empty premises, and once again help the hospitality and tourism industries to thrive. Our plan to revitalise Britain's tourism and hospitality industries is clear, and so in advance of the March the 6th budget, I would be grateful if the Minister could explain what presentations he or the government have taken from businesses in coastal communities and what measures they are considering offering to address some of the points set out by members here today. Madam Chair, I'm sure that many people across coastal towns will be interested to hear the Minister's response. Whatever is said, however, we know that last week's news of the economy being in recession will have added further to the sense of gloom facing hospitality and tourism in coastal areas, and indeed businesses in every sector, in every region and nation of the UK. And that is why our plan to get the economy growing is so important to make sure that tourism and hospitality industries in our coastal communities can thrive once again.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and let me join others by thanking the Backbench Business Committee for granting the debate and congratulating my honourable friend, the member for North Devon, for securing this debate. And as she referred to in her speech, she is indeed a persistent and persuasive advocate, not only for her own constituents and constituency, but actually for this really vital sector, the tourism, hospitality and leisure sector. And I thank everybody for their contributions today. We've heard many good arguments, and I think it shows the passion right across the country, all four nations, enthusiasm, empathy, love and support for this vitally important sector that employs so many of our constituents directly and even more indirectly. Now, as we know, the government is committed to promoting economic growth in all parts of the UK, and in order to do that, we do recognise the unique challenges that coastal communities face, and that has been raised by many members today. For these reasons, we have supported coastal communities to level up through the dedicated funding under the Coastal Communities Fund, while the Levelling Up Fund itself has provided over £1 billion to projects in coastal areas. And this is something raised by the Right Honourable Member for Witham, the Member for Hastings and Rye, and others. And, of course, over £400 million has been provided from the UK Shared Prosperity Fund, and that's going to lead local authorities within or serving coastal areas. Now, the long-term plan for towns also targets more than £1 billion of supports for towns up and down the country, including coastal towns, each of which will get about £20 million over the next decade. And this is built on the support offered through successful bids into town deals and future high street funds. And it's important to mention that of the 101 towns receiving a town deal, 22 of them are coastal, set to receive more than £500 million alongside almost £150 million from the Future High Streets Fund. And therefore, directly or indirectly, the tourism, hospitality and leisure sectors will benefit from some of this additional investment, and of course rightly so, because as I think every member has outlined today, this sector makes such a significant contribution to the UK economy as a whole and to coastal areas in particular. And this is why, of course, since the start of the pandemic, and let's not forget, this is a sector that has particularly suffered from the pandemic and is still recovering. But since the start of the pandemic, we've provided more than £37 billion for the tourism, hospitality and leisure sectors in the form of grants, loans and tax breaks. And I think the Honourable Member for North Devon mentioned some of these loans that are still being repaid. She was right to point out that that is still, a burden on many of them. However, she'll be aware that we have introduced considerable flexibility in those loans, extended the time to pay for some of them from 6 to 10 years and other measures, because we are aware that some of these challenges, there is still a lot of debt to be paid off, both, of course, by individual companies, but also, of course, we know as the nation as a whole, because about £350 billion of support in total was provided to support individuals and the economy during the pandemic. That needs to be paid off, and everybody is sensible and aware that that will not be easy, and it is why, of course, tax levels are as they are at the moment. Now, of course, over the 2021 spending review period, the government's also allocated to support this sector over £100 billion to support the British Tourist Authority, which, of course, supports Visit Britain and Visit England. And again, the Honourable Member for Lowestoft mentioned the important work, but also raised the point about where they spend their money, and that is something that I know my colleagues at DCMS keep a focus on. And I should applaud the work by these bodies and, of course, the work done by Visit Scotland, Visit Wales and Visit Ireland and Northern Ireland as well. They do incredibly valuable work and attract not only domestic visitors, but visitors in their millions from around the world who come and enjoy everything that we've got to offer. Many members today, Madam Chair, mentioned business rates, and I have myself been lobbied by the ever-busy Kate Nichols from UK Hospitality. It sounds like she's been around quite a lot recently, and rightly so, because she represents such an important sector and so many people across the country. And I do hear, and of course we have heard what they have to say, and many members today have re-emphasised the points that the industry bodies are making. I say UK Hospitality is one of many. They're incredibly powerful and persuasive. But as it comes to the autumn statement, we did announce tax cuts for the sector worth about £4.3 billion over 5 years. And again, as mentioned by several members today, we extended the Retail, Hospitality and Leisure Relief Scheme on business rates at 75%. Creating a tax cut worth almost £2.4 billion for about 230,000 retail, hospitality and leisure properties, which of course help our high streets, protect small shops, again many of those in our coastal communities. This, of course, was not extended by our colleagues in Scotland, nor indeed fully extended in Wales. So I can assure honourable members, we do keep an eye on what is happening in other parts of the country, and we do share ideas. This is a sector that is not particularly party political, and certainly in my tourism role, and I know that the tourism ministers and others meet regularly across the nations and work together and share ideas. But I think this shows that in these difficult financial times, there isn't always all the money to go around to do all the things that we would like to do. But we did prioritise retail, hospitality and leisure for that specific additional relief across England. And of course, the UK government also decided to freeze the small business multiplier for the 4th consecutive year in 24-25. And this will protect over 1 million ratepayers, and combined with small business rates relief, protects 90% of properties from inflationary bill increases. It will have a significant impact. The typical pub, for example, will receive £11,800 of RHL relief off their final business rates bill in 24-25. Combined with the small business multiplier being frozen, they will benefit from about £12,800 of support. Now, many members also mentioned the VAT registration threshold, again, something that we've received quite a lot of lobbying on. And of course, the government does recognise that accounting for that can be burdensome on small businesses, but that is why at £85,000 the UK has the second highest VAT threshold within the OECD, and this keeps the majority of UK businesses out of VAT altogether. Now, I do recognise that views on the VAT registration threshold are divided, and the case for change has been regularly reviewed over the years. Just a few years ago there was a review. There was no clear option for reform out of that review, but again, as with all tax policy, we will continue to keep this under review. I'm afraid that may be a point I make several times in my concluding comments over the next few minutes. Now, several members also raised, quite importantly, cutting national insurance, and of course, as part of our long-term plan for growth and to ensure that work pays, we have cut taxes for 29 million working people. From last month, 27 million employees had their national insurance contributions, or NICs, cut from 12% to 10%. That saves the average earning worker, the average worker on £35,400 will receive an annual tax cut of over £450 a year. And of course, the self-employed will have a tax cut, and that benefit will be coming in from April. And this comes as well on top of the existing £5,000 employment allowance, which means that about 40% of all businesses, around 675,000 in total, have been taken out of paying employer NICs entirely. And I know this is something that the Honourable Member for North Devon and I have spoken about on many occasions. So I hear many calls for further reform and further movement on national insurance contributions, but in advance of a fiscal statement, Honourable and Right Honourable Members will be aware that I'm afraid the Chancellor would not be impressive if I announced policy today, but all these things are being looked at. Now, in terms of a few other areas as well mentioned by honourable members, I should say the honourable member for Strangford, who always makes important contributions in every debate, but in particular, I know, over many years in my multiple roles, the tourism, hospitality and leisure sector is a particular passion for his. I will finally take him up on his offer to visit his constituency. I say that is one goal I will have to make sure we sort out. So let's talk dates very, very soon. But he also mentioned, as always, something that other people don't bring up. And there was one point he mentioned as well that really reminded me, and I think all of us here, that there are some things we can control and pull certain levers. But he also mentioned this all-important thing for this sector and for our country, the weather, which plays such a vital role, of course, in boom or bust sometimes in the tourism, hospitality and leisure sector. But the honourable member for Lowestoft also pointed out the incredible diversity. And I think it's one thing that we do need to remember as well, that we have such a diverse range of offerings in the United Kingdom, that actually at all times of year, in all weathers, there is something really compelling and something to visit. And I think that is something that we need to make sure we get across both domestically and internationally in marketing. And the Honourable Member for Strangford also mentioned, for example, our heritage and the National Trust and so on, the role that they play, and indeed many others in the ecosystem. His points then on the Barnet consequentials and block grant, I'm more than happy to have conversations with other colleagues about this, and I know he's having such conversations as well, and I'll make sure they hear what he said today, as well as his contributions in other areas. The Honourable Member for Hastings and Rye also mentioned, again, related to the weather, the importance of seasonality, but also what we can do to try and reduce that seasonality. It is a particularly acute issue for the UK tourism industry and, of course, impacts productivity over the course of the year as well. She also mentioned planning policy and the important changes announced recently by DLUC in response to the consultation between DCMS and DLUC and the introduction of the registration scheme as well. And I think that's something that the sector has been calling for some time, and we're hopeful that it will have the desired impact. The Right Honourable Gentleman for Orkney and Shetland also talked about different planning policies in different parts of the UK and different regimes for these things. Again, he's extremely knowledgeable and, again, an advocate for this sector. He was also right to point out that this is a sector where the multiplier impact is really key. And there's obviously direct impacts, but sometimes indirect impacts are difficult to assess. He mentioned in particular the VAT cut that happened during the pandemic. We estimate that that cost the Treasury as such about £8 billion. But of course, that was needed. It was in a very difficult time. It was always intended to be temporary, and we are hearing many calls for a further reduction in VAT. That figure alone shows, though, it would not come without a considerable cost. And, of course, these need to be factored in. But there is a recognition that there's a multiplier impact. If we were to repeat that similar reduction, it would probably come to the cost of £10 or £12 billion. But also, again, I know that some are lobbying for a smaller rate cut to around 12.5%. That would be less. But we are still talking about billions of pounds of revenue that would be lost to the Treasury if we had a VAT cut. And as with all demands and requests for VAT cut, there is always that complication of what will be the purpose and what will the impact, and can we be confident that the lower prices would then be passed on to the end consumer, because that is the purpose usually of VAT cuts versus helping with cash flow through other mechanisms such as, for example, business rates relief. So it's the mixture as a whole that we do need to consider, but he was absolutely right to point out that this is a sector where you pull one lever and it can have a very, very positive impact across a very wide area indeed. The Honourable Member for Lowestoft was quite right, as I said, to showcase his constituency and others, because we do have so much to offer. He then raised, not surprisingly, a very, very broad range of asks and requests. I will pass those on to the other relevant departments. But I also want to give him the reassurance that we do talk across government and cross-government departments. So many of the points he's raised, I've had conversations with colleagues about this sector and indeed others, because no one department really has oversight or control of this sector. As we've found today through the very broad-ranging debate, many ministers and many ministerial departments have some control over certain levers here, but we do talk together. He also mentioned hoe seasons in his constituency, and I should declare that actually I have visited there on many occasions because they were a client of mine many years ago, because some people know I actually worked in this sector for many years before coming into Parliament, and I always enjoyed my visits to Lowestoft and the area. It was always sunny as well, by the way. I'm coming to an end, by the way, Madam Chair, because I know this debate could go on for 3 hours, but I'll make sure that we don't. My SNP and Labour opposite numbers. Actually, many areas, because of the nature of this sector, I'm in agreement with many of the points that they made, and in some other areas in slight respectful disagreement. But I don't think that should detract from the fact that this is an area that I think all of us support, all parties support. We have differences in views on what levers to pull, but this is a sector that I know has support across the whole of the House, and therefore, Madam Chair, I'd just like to conclude by saying I very much appreciate all the contributions today from members and right honourable members. Many substantial contributions, some compelling arguments and some very, very good ideas. In advance of a fiscal event, of course, I cannot make any announcements or commitments here today. What I do want to do, though, is make it very clear that we are listening, and we are always listening. Thank you very much.
Your chairmanship this afternoon, and thank you to all honourable and right honourable members for their contributions and the Minister for his response. It's always a pleasure for me to be the one-woman tourist board for North Devon for the afternoon. But on a slightly more serious note, part of the reason for this debate, as highlighted by so many other colleagues this afternoon, is that coastal communities often hide very severe deprivation behind those phenomenal tourism businesses that we are all here talking about today. And Ilfracombe in my North Devon constituency is no exception, unfortunately, to that rule. And I will take this opportunity to put in one final pitch to the Minister that, yes, we have levelled up across the country at large, but small coastal communities like Ilfracombe, with a population of just 12,000, have missed out on multiple pots of money, and it is the third most deprived town in the country. And I think there is more that we could do when looking at these small areas, which is why this debate is so vital, because tourism and hospitality is their number one part of the economy, and it really is vital that we get this right for those communities, whilst I will continue to fight for more funding for those coastal communities from other pots of money. So thank you to all members, and the draw of the sea and the pub, I think, is now upon us.
The question is that this House has considered fiscal support for tourism and hospitality in coastal areas. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it, the ayes have it. Order, order. The sitting stands adjourned.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.